I'm gonna get us started. Like late joiners can always still join us a little later on. So welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today. My name is Jurian from Maanen. I am the VP of Sales for the EMEA region at Zone&Co. And I'm very happy to have been invited today by Alta Via to participate in their webinar series. And I'll be walking you today through our ZoneApprovals app, an application that makes setting up approval workflows in NetSuite effortless. And this is the agenda that I want to run through today. So in a moment, I will give the word first to Martin from Alta Via, who will give a quick introduction to Alta Via in this webinar series. Then I will do an introduction on Zone&Co. As a company, we'll quickly show you the apps portfolio that we provide. And then we're going to look at ZoneApprovals. I'll do a quick introduction. I will be doing a live demo today. And after the demo, I'll show you a few cool new upcoming features. So a look at our roadmap. And after that, we should have plenty of space for Q&A. So if any questions come up during the demo, you can use the chat functionality to post them. Martin will be monitoring the chat, and he will be reading those questions out to me during the Q&A, so I can answer any questions that might come up during my demonstration. So with that, let me first give the word to Martin for a quick introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Jurian. Yeah, welcome from my side as well. I'm Martin Kalkuhl. I'm with Alta Via since 2011, the first employee. Started the NetSuite business in Germany or the DACH region. For those of you who don't know me yet, yeah, we have been quite some time in this area. So if you go to the next slide already, a little quick run through who we are. So we founded, Peter von Zimmermann founded the NetSuite business 2009, and later on we also became a NetSuite SDN partner, Suite Cloud Developer Network partner, which means we can build extensions, or we do build extensions, apps, bundles, however you want to call it, for NetSuite, just like ZoneApprovals. Yeah, we have quite some experience with different customers. Some have their headquarters in Germany, some have them somewhere. So we divided these numbers by 50 own customers where we have the license as well, and about 350 projects where we have been helping, supporting localization of the NetSuite accounts of various customers in various industries, all industries, software, wholesale, e-commerce, services, whatever, you name it. We have two offices, basically. One is the headquarters in southern Germany, St. Leonrod, and most of the people are in Berlin. The biggest team is in Berlin. We have almost 50 people now, 48, so two more this week coming in, so I had to update the slides. However, almost 50. And all of them are employed and locally in Europe, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Poland, and Ukraine. Okay, Ukraine and Europe might be a problem, but yeah, go and push it again. So here's a little view of how we grew in the last years. And if you push the button again, then you see we almost doubled from 21 to 22. And yeah, that's important to show, because the philosophy is to work with partners. And if we work with partners, we have to also have some knowledge of the individual products. So for the Zone example, go to the next slide. Of course, we had an extensive time already since, I wasn't quite sure, but very long. And so I know Jurian quite some time. And the special thing with Fast4 has always been, or Zone now, is that we are implementing products ourselves. So we have resources ourselves for bank reconciliation, for example, credit card import. We support for capture, zone capture, for zone approvals. We are starting now, and potentially we can look at and see if we can help. And last but not least, zone billing, which is of course a little bit more complex than compared with suite billing. We have to see, what all is needed. However, in any case, we always want to be the preferred #1 support partner. So for you to talk to us in these product in all these various products. That's the goal. That's why we have built up the resources and employed a lot of more people. Yeah, so for me, the main trigger question is always important in this part of the webinar that you should remember. So do you want more control over your approval process in NetSuite? Which, of course, Jurian will show you now, but just that's the message from my side. We are the ones to talk to. And if we have any questions afterwards, feel free to contact me or Jurian. We will align so you're not penetrated with you want to buy this or buy that, or you need this or that. We will take care in the background. That's my little intro already, and you can go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that, Martin. Yeah, so I think Martin already referred to that briefly. I think it's always good to still mention this because a lot of people on the session today might know the name Fast4. Fast4 was an SDN partner based out of Amsterdam, was on the market since 2012. Fast4 was acquired by Zone&Co at the beginning of last year. So we actually just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. Eventually, that Fast4 branding will really be replaced by Zone&Co, but because it still has quite brand recognition, I thought it would be interesting to still position that. And I also wanted to introduce who are Zone&Co. So what's their story? So Zone&Co was founded by 2 co-founders who had worked at a large software company using NetSuite, got very familiar with how NetSuite could be optimized for those type of companies, and thought, hey, we want to do that for other parties as well. And they became a NetSuite solution provider in 2013. And working on those projects, supporting those type of companies, they realized that they were doing quite a bit of customization in the systems. There were processes that always required a little extra help, so to speak, mainly around the billing processes. And they thought, well, there is a better way to do that than to customize it each time. So they became an SDN partner so that they could start developing applications. And they built Zone Billing, which in essence is a standardized product to tackle those billing issues they'd encountered for their customers. Got really rapid growth after launching that. And in 2021, they received an investment from a VC, Insight Partners. And with that investment, the vision was that they wanted to expand their product offering and expand their global reach. And that led also to that acquisition of Fast4, because Fast4 already had a suite of native NetSuite applications, had a big team in EMEA. So the idea was that was the perfect match. Also in 2022, another party joined the Zone family called Satori. They work in the area of reporting. They have a Power BI integration. And together, we now have quite a portfolio of products on offer. And these are some of the Zone apps. Zone Capture, that's our AP automation offering. ZoneApprovals, we'll be looking at that today. Zone Billing, I mentioned it during my intro, an application that can help you tackle pretty much any type of billing scenario that you might want to do in NetSuite. And Zone Payments, which is our application for connecting with PSP parties, and that's starting as a Stripe integration. So I just wanted to mention these. I'm not going to go into too much details, but if any of those tech lines are interesting to you, have a look at our website or keep an eye out on our socials, because we do regular sessions on all of these applications. Today, I'll focus on ZoneApprovals. So ZoneApprovals is our native suite app for handling approval logic. For those of you who are not familiar with that term, native suite app means it's built on top of NetSuite. So it's really part of your NetSuite environment. Users don't see a difference of what standard NetSuite functionality, what is it that we add with our application. ZoneApprovals, we started building that based on really coming from the conversations we had around Zone Capture, our AP tooling, where we got a lot of requests around how do you handle approval workflows. And for quite some time, we positioned the NetSuite workflow builder for that. It's a fantastic tool. But the feedback we got quite often is that for teams like financial teams or other key users in the organization, it's really difficult for them to build those using a workflow manager or to maintain those because it's quite complex. You need proper training on that tool. And also if they were supported by an administrator, maybe internally, they felt like they didn't want to rely on that because these approval logics needed like regular changes and it was not efficient. So we heard that so often, we figure, hey, we need to build something here. And if we're gonna create an approval application, let's make this broader than just AP approvals. And let's try to build in a lot of functionalities that are difficult to do or more difficult to do in another way within NetSuite. So I tried to summarize it. So I tried to summarize the value we built with this application in 5 key points. So the first one being, we really wanted this application to make it easy to configure your approval and maintain your approval workflow. So no technical training required, easy drag and drop, and really make it simple for any type of non-technical user. Secondly, we wanted that approval process to be effortless. And that is both within NetSuite. So we put a lot of emphasis in making those processes easy, clear, but also we realized pretty early on that approval by email would be very important, both because it makes it easy for users. You don't have to be behind your laptop to approve a transaction, but also if you have employees that maybe do not have NetSuite access, they could still approve transactions via that email tool. We wanted to get rid of manual chasing, so we've introduced nice dashboard portlets. There are email reminders you can set up in those. Substitution or delegation is something we heard a lot. So if someone is not able to approve, transactions can get stuck. And we wanted to come up with an easy way to then delegate approval. And complete visibility, which especially with some of our largest customers was a requirement that during audits, you need to be able to very easily show what happened with those approvals, all the individual steps. And we built that into the application as well. And I feel like with approvals, that is really an app that you should just see in action and not on slides. So I'm going to jump over to my NetSuite account. You should now be seeing my NetSuite dashboard. And here we have our approval app installed. You can see a native application. So we add like a nice integrated approval dashboard, completely looks and feels like NetSuite. I have pre-prepared an approval matrix today, just to make sure I don't type in anything incorrect in a live webinar. But I do want to show you how easy it is to create these from scratch. So I'm going to go to my setup menu here. And there I now have a menu edit for zone approvals. If I click here,
just a little break. Can everyone see it? I have a little. I can't see the screen. Is that only me or someone else as well?
Let me reshare that. Yeah. Thank you for flagging that.
Yeah, now I can see it.
Fantastic. Thanks for that.
Okay.
So I was highlighting the approval portlet here, and let's go ahead and let's go create a new matrix from scratch. So I'm going to go to Zone Approvals here. In this menu, we have all the options around our apps, including you can contact our support from here, you can access our knowledge base, and I can go ahead and create a new approval matrix. Now, when I do that, I go to this screen, and the first thing I have to select is what is the subsidiary for which we want to run this matrix. So I could choose a single subsidiary. I can also apply one matrix to multiple subsidiaries if that's what I would want to do. I can choose a record type. So right now we support the transactions that are also supported by the standard approval suite flow. Like later on, I'll show you our roadmap as well. This we're working on. So with each new release this year, we tend to do around 4 to 6 new releases each year. We'll be adding new transactions to this list of supported transactions. We select the currency. Later on, we're going to look at some approval levels with amounts typed into them. So we want to know what's the context of those amounts. So we select the currency for this matrix. And then we have a concept called the hierarchy. So you can create as many of these approval hierarchies as you'd like. And in essence, what you do there is you decide how many levels of approvals do you want within that hierarchy, and what are the amounts tied in to those levels of approval. So let me just visualize that. Like if I select, for example, my Zone&Co hierarchy, this makes it a bit more clear, right? You see that in that hierarchy, we've configured 3 levels with the amounts of lower than 500, more than 500, more than 10,000. So this is flexible. If I would open up a different hierarchy, let's say webinar demo hierarchy, you see this is set up completely different. So here we have 4 levels, they're named differently. We have an always approved step. We have different amount steps. So you can set this up as flexible as you would like. We can define a start date. You can also define an end date. You don't have to, but let's say if you want your matrix to only be valid in a certain period, we have customers that use that around Christmas, for example, then they get way more orders in. They want to use some higher threshold, and you can do that by setting an end date. And you can set up an overdue threshold. That means after how many hours of a transaction pending approval do you want to flag that as overdue? And when you flag it as overdue, it means you can report on it separately. You will see it in a different section on your dashboard. You'll see that later on. Then down here, we can simply start drag and dropping in the criteria we want to use for our approval. So right now, those criteria are segments or custom segments. We will be extending this basically to support any field value in NetSuite. We do already fully support line level approval and header level approval. So what you would do is you simply drag and drop in the criteria you want to use, let's say department and location, and then I can start building out my approvers. I could say, let's add an approver, and if the department is finance and my location is, let's say, Berlin, then this person should always approve this person above 500, and you would just build out these approvers here. Here in selecting the approvers, there are a couple of options, and I just want to walk you through these briefly. So you've already seen, if I scroll here, you can select an employee. And that's all employees you have in your system, regardless of whether they are a NetSuite user, yes or no. Yes or no. We have a few additional options. We can also select the source vendor approver. That would be an employee that you would select on a field on the vendor. So think of that as the person who would need to approve bills for that particular vendor. You can select an employee approver, and that tends to be used for supervisor approver, for example. And I'm quite excited about this, we've just introduced group approval. So you can actually select a group of people that could approve a certain transaction. That works pretty simple. Like in NetSuite, you have the ability to create groups. Those groups you can make dynamic or static. Like if you make it dynamic, it means there's a safe search behind it. So you could say all current HR managers. And if you would create a group like this, there would be an option there where you say, hey, this group should be available within ZoneApprovals. Once you check that box, it's then something you can select as an approver on your approval matrix. Now, as I mentioned, I have pre-prepared a matrix for today that I want to run through in my example. And within this matrix, I said, okay, if we have a purchase order in the Netherlands subsidiary, then if Department Finance is selected, I should be approving that transaction if it's more than 500 euros. And my colleague Barbara should be approving it if it's more than 10,000. So let's go ahead and see this in action. I'm just going to go ahead and create a purchase order. I'm going to select a vendor that I know is in my Netherlands subsidiary. Click on that. And I'm going to go down here, going to add in some items. Just making sure that just going to make sure that the amount is higher than 10,000, so it will be rerouted to 2 people. And I'm going to select my finance department that we use in our matrix. Then hit the save button. Give it just a moment to load. I'll take a sip of water. And then we have a 2-step approach here. So you see, once I've saved it, I then have to submit it for approval. We do that deliberately because we want to make sure you have a moment to still check everything so that it doesn't go to full approval routing already, why maybe you forgot to fill in the department. I'm gonna open a new tab and I'm gonna hit submit for approval on this transaction. And while this is being submitted for approval, I'm gonna just hover over to my home dashboard here and use this opportunity to talk a little bit about our approval portal. So approval portlet can be added to your dashboard. If you add it, you see you can track your pending approvals, your overdue approvals, and approved transactions. I can see that my purchase order was created. If I refresh this, you will see that immediately that transaction shows up in my pending approval list. It's good to know that these are saved searches, and with standard NetSuite functionality, you can use these saved searches also for other purposes. So you can use that saved search to set up email reminders, for example, so that you get an email whenever a new transaction comes in that is pending your approval. You could also set these up as your own reminders on your dashboard if you prefer that over using the dashboard. So going to my purchase order, I can see a few things are happening. So it went through the approval routing. I'm getting a flag here that's saying, hey, this needs to be approved. And it needs to be approved under level 2. Total amount is over 500. You can see the status is pending approval and that I have been rerouted as the next approver according to our matrix logic. But there's more. So if I go to our zone approval tabs here and I scroll down, you can see that we have something called approval logs. And on these approval logs, we will make everything visible that's happening with this approval. So I can already see now at create all the steps that need to take place. In this case, we need to have 2 approvals, but everything that will happen here will also be stored on these logs. So let me give you an example of that. Like if I scroll up, I can reject or approve this transaction. If I reject it, I need to specify a rejection reason. If I approve it, that's optional. There's a configuration whether you also always want to have an approval reason, yes or no. I'm feeling not too difficult today, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to approve this transaction. I'll hit the approve button. And when that reloads, you see that it's now being rerouted to the next approval. And if I go to my approval log, I can see that that was stored, right? I can see that it's now approved. I can see when I did it. I can even see sort of how I did it and that it was by the user interface. Now, there are a few more functionalities that I want to show here. And a nice way for me to walk you through these is by I'm opening up my employee record. So if I go to my employee record in a different tab, you see we have a ZoneApprovals tab here. And on this ZoneApprovals tab, there are a few other features that I want to highlight to you. And the first one is this one. So this is this approval delegation that I talked about on the slides. If I open that up, you can see that here I can say, I want to delegate my approvals, let's say to Alex, because I'm going to go on vacation, let's say from the 27th of March to the 1st of April. And if I would now configure or save this delegation, then when my vacation starts, my open approvals will be rerouted to my delegates so they don't get stuck. If new transactions come in that are routed to me as approver, they will now be delegated as well to Alex. And when I come back from vacation, they will all be rerouted back to me. So like a really easy, clean way. Good to know, if I go back to my purchase order, all of that will be stored, right? So if a delegate approves and not the original person, you would be able to see that here on the approval. Another important feature that I want to show is that if I'm on my employee record, you can see that I've enabled myself for approval by email. And I want to show you how that works. So if I go to my purchase order and I go to the communication tab, you see that 2 emails were sent out, like one to me when it was rerouted to me, and then one to my colleague Barbara when it was routed to her. So this is our approval by email functionality that will just send out an email message with a text driven by a template. It will attach also the transaction to that email. And I can now reply to that email with a certain keyword to either approve or reject that transaction. And that will be then processed here in NetSuite. Now, I want to just briefly show some configurations around it because this is really flexible to set up. So I'm going to go to Setup and ZoneApprovals, and I'm going to open up my approval configuration. You can create different configuration records for different subsidiaries in NetSuite. So here you see that we have a separate one for different subsidiaries that we have set up in this account. That's really handy because if I click on one of them, let's say the France one, here you see we have some approval by email settings. We've enabled it for this subsidiary. And here I can really make sure that that works well for that subsidiary. So I could use a different email template, for example. So it could be an email template that's in French. But also those approve and reject strings, I can provide. I can make sure that they are multi-language, so that if someone replies, I won't try to do a French accent, but approve, then it will result in that transaction being approved. There are some more options here. I won't go through all of them because I'm worried that we don't have a full hour to spend, but I want to highlight a couple which I think are really interesting. This is one of them. So you can see that we're able to lock transactions during approval or after approval. And if we lock transactions, you're also able to still make exceptions. So you could say, hey, but this person or this role should still be able to make changes. And one that I definitely still want to highlight is this one here, the unapproved transaction cool. Because in NetSuite, if you have a posting transaction like a bill or an invoice that is not yet approved, the default behavior is that that's not yet posting. But towards month's end, actually, even if it's not approved, you would like to see some financial impact of that in your reporting. So we've introduced the automation of transaction accruals within our approval app. Basically, there are some options. You can say, hey, if we have an unapproved transactions, we immediately want that to post in the pool. If I untick it, you see that then I get a different option here. And I could say, you know what, I want then 1 day before month end. for that accrual to be created, and one day after month end, I want that to be reversed again. And then this will create that automated booking for you. So I have just pre-prepared an example here. If I open up this bill for Asana, you can see it's pending approval. If I go here to my zone approval tab, you see that because it's pending approval, we've created an unapproved transaction accrual where we are counter booking the impact of this bill to the GL account that we configured as our deferred account. So when I started working with NetSuite, I was a financial clerk. Years and years ago, I spent so much time on doing this during monthly closing. So I'm really excited that we now fully automate that process. The final thing that I want to show is that we're doing all of those steps, all those logging, to make sure you get the right insights as well on your approval process. So out of the box, we come with audit reporting. In that reporting, you will see all the transactions that went through our approval app. You can drill down in any of those transactions. And if I click on, let's say, this purchase orders, in that report, you will be able to see basically everything that happened with that approval. So all the steps that took place, how much time was spent. So a really easy way with one click of a button to get all those insights out of this. I'm going to switch back to my slides, just because the last time I switched from slides to demo, it stopped sharing. So Martin, if it stopped sharing again, just give me a shout. So some of the things that we looked at the demo today, just a quick review. I showed you the approval portlet. We went through the matrix and how easy it is to set up that approval logic. Approval by email. Because I spent quite some time talking about lots of functionality, I skipped over the super approver, but just to mention that the way that works is you can mark an employee as a super approver. So for example, one of your system administrators, they will then be able to override approval. So even if they are not the person that it's rerouted to, if they are designated the super approval, they will be able to push that approval through. Then you always have to supply a reason, and it will always be logged separately. So you can see it was done by a super approval. And we looked at the full audit reporting that gives you that great visibility into an easy visibility into your approval steps. So what's next? Let me give you a couple of things that are coming up. We're going to extend this app to pretty much any type of transaction in NetSuite. So as we are going through our releases this year, we'll be adding to that list that I showed you. We're going to introduce a bulk approval interface. That's going to be really, really good. Basically, it will give you one screen, will show all pending transactions, so all transactions that are pending your approval. No matter if they are bills or journals or purchase orders, you don't have to go to separate screens. You'll have one overview. And from that overview, you can mass approve transactions. You can give notes for each individual transactions. That will really be both a game changer and a huge time saver. We're going to extend ZoneApprovals to also support custom records and custom transactions. The default vendor bill approver can now be selected on a top level on the vendor, but that will also be extended to support multi-subsidiary vendors. So you can choose different default approvers for vendors based on the subsidiary. And finally, also a really big one, I highlighted it briefly when I created my matrix, is that we will start supporting pretty much any field value in NetSuite, so not just segments, but any field that you have in NetSuite as a criteria for your approval logic. So yeah, keep an eye on your email, keep an eye out on your social channels, because we'll always do release updates and you'll be seeing this new functionality coming to our app soon. That's what I wanted to show today. I wanted to make sure that there's still some space for a Q&A. Martin, were there any questions in the chat?
Yes, Lenka is asking, there's 2 questions. Unless the transaction is approved, there is no GL impact and no postings. If so, can we see the PDF template defined for that particular transaction form, so the user see how the PDF will look like before approving?
I'm not sure if I fully get the question. When it comes to that, there's no posting yet when it's unapproved. That's correct. That's what I was sort of trying to show. Maybe the question came before that. That's what I was trying to show, that our approval functionality will solve. If it's not yet approved and you're sending it via email for approval, that will pick up the transaction printout, and that will always just show the values there, no matter if that's already a posting one, yes or no. So that should just work fine, also for posting transaction like bills and invoice.
Okay, Lenka, if the question is answered good enough, please let us know. Otherwise, please update the question. The second question from Lenka is approval configuration. Is there a plan to enable option for selecting custom attributes to be used in approval criteria, not only standard NetSuite segment?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the final point that I mentioned on my roadmap, that we're going to extend the options there to all fields in NetSuite. So not just segments and custom segments, but also custom fields that you might have created.
Okay. Lenka says thanks, so seems to be okay. Maanen has a question. Do you keep rejecting reasons? And if yes, can you show us?
Yeah, no, I can. Just see if I still have this pending approval. I can. It's always dangerous to do live on the fly demo during a webinar, but I'm gonna try it anyway. Yeah, so this is the one we just looked at, right? And I designated myself super approver, so I'm able to still reject and approve even though it's not routed to me. So if I click on reject, it will ask for a rejection reason. I can say this is rejected with 2 exclamation marks just to drive it home. I will click on OK. And basically what that will do and should do is when I showed you those approval, like you'll see that it will now crash. But like when I show you those, it worked. When I showed you those approval logs, remember, like here, you now see that this is rejected. The line is a lovely orange, and the rejection reason is stored here. So that's available. Works the same for if you give an additional approval reason. Then you will also have the pop-up window, and that would then show here under approval reason.
Okay. I can see no more further questions in the chat, but I have a couple. Number one, I put it in the chat here. Can people also approve transactions from the employee center?
Yeah. So the NetSuite Employee Center already supports that for standard transaction approval. But what is good to mention is that also for our bulk approval screen, we also want to incorporate that in the Employee Center. So it's definitely our strategy and vision to make sure that that's the case.
Okay, thank you. Second question, is there also the option to put a button in the email instead of replying?
Yeah, we deliberately don't do it, Martin, because what we found is that we want to make sure that the approval comes from the actual person that's designated as the approver. And if you put a button in an email and someone forwards that email to someone else and they click that button, there's no way to verify who actually clicked it. Well, if you use an email reply, you can have a look at, hey, who did that email come from? And is that our designated approver? So then we have a way to check that. That's why we decided not to work with buttons, but with this email reply method.
Okay. And one last question I have was, I'm not sure if you answered this already. Are transactions automatically locked while approval is taking place?
Yeah, I showed that right during the,
Yes.
the configuration record. So automatic, it's a configuration setting that you do there. So when you go through implementation, we'll ask that question. And then for a configuration, you have to check that box to say, I want it to be locked. Then it's locked. So it's a customer preference that you can configure.
Okay, cool. I'm through with my questions.
Fantastic. Then thank you for inviting us to this webinar series, Martin. And thank you to everyone who joined us live today, or everyone who is watching the recording whenever. And I wish you all a very pleasant rest of your Thursday.
Yeah, thank you from my side as well. I see a few customers of ours. Have a great day. We'll be in touch in one way or the other. Anyway, have a great day and see you soon in one of the next webinars. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.